These three men were never found. This next story is a literal nightmare that has inspired books, movies, and TV shows. These three poor souls vanished in one of the most mysterious, supernatural ways that anybody could imagine. Many people have fear of the dark, and fear of the ocean, and a fear of isolation. Now imagine if all three of these elements were wrapped into one. This is the story of the Flannan lighthouse disappearances. This happened in the year 1900, only about 1 year after the lighthouse's construction was completed in 1899. Now this lighthouse sits about 20 miles off the Isle of Lewis, which is an island off of Scotland, and it has been reported as one of the most remote places on the planet you could live. Now this island was not very big. It was covered in jagged rocks and steep cliffs. There was no one or no animals living on this rocky island. The only thing there was this lighthouse. And this lighthouse was there because so many people had crashed into it. Now this lighthouse had a set of rules that all lighthouse keepers would abide by. The first rule is one man stays in the lighthouse at all times. It does not matter if it is day or night. It does not matter if the lighthouse is being in operation at the moment. One man stays in the lighthouse at all times. The second rule is obviously in any low light conditions that the light on the lighthouse had to be on and had to be functioning. So if it was foggy, if it was dark, what have you, relief would only come about every 3 weeks. So you had to stay on this island no matter what. There was no option to get off. The waters around this island were very choppy, and you would be stuck there for at most 3 weeks at any given time. And the last rule is that everything had to be heavily documented in a logbook. Every single day, they would have to log entries from weather reports to ships that passed by, to if there was anything going on the island that anybody needed to know about. So anything at all that would have been unusual or normal in that matter would have been documented in this logbook. And that was one of the biggest rules they had, because if a ship crashed, they had to be writing the logs down on, to explain why, because the port authorities could be held liable for the cargo if something with the lighthouse was going wrong. So it was a very important part of the job. There was 3 lighthouse keepers that disappeared in this story. All 3 were on the island at the same time. The first one was James. He was the most experienced of the 3, and he was the one that was going to be in charge. He'd been doing this for decades and knew the area very well. He was an experienced sailor before this. Second in command would be Thomas. Now, Thomas was an experienced sailor that had been lighthouse keeping for many years, and he was going to be the next in line if something were to happen to James. Now, the last man was Donald. Now, Donald is a key element to this story because Donald was the least experienced of the 3, but had still been doing this job for a couple years. The unique thing about Donald in this story is he was not one of the original 3. So one of the original 3 has been lost in history of who that was, but he was sick. And when the relief boat that comes every few weeks, they had notified and they said, hey, one of the lighthouse keepers is sick. So they actually made an exception and brought him back, and then brought another lighthouse keeper, Donald, to take his spot. So Donald was not a part of the original 3. So here is the timeline of events. This is going to be the strange happenings, the normal occurrences, and the investigation that followed. So December 7th, 1900, the relief ship came to bring Donald to replace the sick one. Everything was normal. They checked the logbooks while they were there. That was something that they did routinely, was check the logbooks, just check on the building, making sure that structurally everything was fine. If they needed to fix something, they'd fix something while they were there. And everything was normal. The logbooks were normal. Everything was going smooth, except for the other guy that got sick, which, it's not a big deal. It happens. There was no strange behavior amongst the crew, nothing. They leave. Now, the next thing that happened is when things drastically changed. And there's a lot of gray areas in here because their logbooks were kept all the way through December 13th. So about a week after that relief ship left. And everything seemed to be normal in those logbooks. Nothing was out of the ordinary in those logbooks leading up to that moment. December 15th, the night of the 14th, early the morning of the 15th, a ship passed by the lighthouse. And luckily the captain knew this area very well and knew to watch out for this rock. Because this lighthouse had only been here for a year. So, and this captain had gone through this ocean many times before that lighthouse was there. But he noticed that the lighthouse was supposed to be there, and he could actually see the silhouette of the lighthouse in the moonlight. But he noticed that there was no light on the lighthouse. So as soon as he got to port early that morning, he told port authorities. And this was December 15th. He told port authorities, hey, I went by the lighthouse last night. There's nobody that, like, the light was not on. Something must be wrong. You might want to go check on your boys. Now, Scotland records do show that this report was heavily mishandled. It did not cross paths like it should have. And we see this in law enforcement all the time today. People report things and just it doesn't get followed up on. And that's what happened. So the relief boat did not leave until it was scheduled to leave again, which would have been a week after this event. In fact, it was about 11 days. On December 26th, the relief boat went to check on the crew, give them supplies, and right away they knew that something was wrong because before they got to the island, they noticed there was nobody on the shore. Because you got to imagine, these three guys for weeks only have each other to talk to. So they're very eager to see the relief boat come in. They're very eager to get, fresh fruit and fresh produce and, get to talk to somebody. And they would normally be standing on the bank, especially on a pretty day like today, waving at the crew as they came in. They would help guide them in and tie their ropes off and help them dock. They would mostly talk to them up on the way to the lighthouse and just, hang out. And they noticed immediately that no one was out there. So this actually was very hard to dock on this island alone. So the captain of this relief boat actually wanted them to come help him dock. So he actually fired into the air to let them know, like, hey, I'm down here in case they didn't realize what day it was, because it's easy to get your days mixed up, or maybe they didn't realize what time it was. So he wanted to let them know, hey, I'm out here. So they waited a few minutes and they saw no movement from the lighthouse. At this moment, he said, okay, let's just go ahead and dock and risk, scratching the boat up a little bit. So they docked. And the vice captain of this ship, who is actually a lighthouse keeper sometimes himself, decided to walk up to the lighthouse and investigate while the other crew was unloading the supplies. And as he's walking up there, he knew that something was wrong. His gut was telling him that something was severely wrong in the situation because the doors and windows were all closed to the lighthouse and the housing building at the bottom of it. Now, why is this unusual that all the doors and windows were closed? You got to remember, this was before heat and air. So even if it was hot outside, you'd want your doors and windows open to get airflow because it'd be very stagnant because there's no circulating air inside. And on the flip side, if it's cold outside, you'd want to open the windows and let the sunlight in and stuff. You want to let some of that heat in. So it was one of those things where they would have wanted the doors and windows open. This was pretty routine and pretty normal. And they noticed that all of them were closed. He realizes the front gate is also shut, which is normal, but he goes ahead and he opens the gate. He goes up to the main door and it's locked. Now, that's a very important detail to this story because the biggest theory out there is that these men somehow got caught in a big storm and actually fell off one of the cliffs of the island. But then who locked the door? We'll get to that in a minute. So he unlocks the door. He's got a key. He unlocks the door. He goes in. Everything in this place was tidy except for the beds weren't made, which is normal. Men aren't going to make their bed every day, especially when there's no house guests coming by. But the kitchen was cleaned. All the oil lamps had been cleaned. And this is important because if you don't know how oil lamps work, they produce a lot of soot. They get very dirty very quickly, which will then also dim the light. And it's also a fire hazard. So you have to clean your oil lamps. So their oil lamps had been cleaned. The kitchen was clean and tidy. The only thing that was out of place is there was one kitchen chair that it's been obscured through history if the chair was missing entirely or if it just wasn't where it was supposed to be. That was the only thing in this whole building that was out of place. And that's a pretty minor detail about one chair being out of place. So they did a thorough look through of this housing. They could not find anyone here. They found the next clue. The next clue was that there should be 3 sets of wet weather clothes. If you're not from the military or anything, they're like very, very heavy, thick, wet clothes. Like you'd see fishermen wear these on the boats and stuff. And it's, they're waterproof clothes because it rains all the time out here. Sometimes if there's big swells, the ocean water comes over. And if you have to go outside and get anything, like some of their big supply lockers and their big storage bins were outside in these big things that were bolted down. They'd have to go outside. Sometimes they would also have to go out on the rail to maintain or fix the bulb. Now, 2 sets are missing. Remember that rule that we talked about earlier? One man had to stay in the lighthouse at all times. So this is going to demolish the theory that we get to later about the storm sweeping them away. Well, one, who locked the door, right? And if they were following the rules, 1 man would have stayed inside, 2 men would have went outside to fix whatever they had to fix. If the 3rd man ended up breaking the rule and going outside, because he's supposed to not break that rule no matter what, even if they see life and death is literally how it was in the handbook, you stay inside. 1 man stays inside the lighthouse. So even if he'd have broke the rule, why didn't he take the wet weather clothes to be in the storm? Why wouldn't he taken, the extra precaution, this extra gear that would have helped him in the storm? So And even that, if it was such a dire emergency that he ran out before changing clothes, why did he stop and lock the door behind himself if it was such an emergency? That's what we're getting to. The most important clue is the logbook. They look in the logbook, and supposedly, and one of the reasons why I say supposedly, is a lot of myths and conspiracies say that this case has been sealed where you can't look at the records. And while that's partially true that you can't look at the records the same day, you actually have to put in a request to look at the records of this case, which I think is very strange that you have to put in a request to look at these individual records, and they're not public records like other missing people cases in Scotland. It'd be one thing if they were all like where you had to put in written requests, but not all cases are like that. Just this one, for some reason, and some other key ones. So why do you have to have special permission to look in this case? The logbook entirely has been lost to history. That you can just Google that and tell that I'm not lying. The logbook has been lost in the wind of history. But supposedly, if we take their word for it, the logbook was completely normal until December 13th. And then December 14th was the first missing day. Now, it's funny because first eyewitnesses and first reporters to this case that were friends and family and people looking at this, they all say that the logbook did not say things were normal. They said after that first ship that brought Donald to replace him, immediately the logbook started being filled with the captain of the crew, which would be James, saying things like, Donald is suspicious. Donald is eerily quiet and he is always watching. And then he would also turn on the other guy too and say that he was looking like a man possessed. The winds are speaking to us at night. Spirits are rising from the sea every night while we're trying to sleep. Supernatural things are happening. Witchcraft is among us. The logbook was supposedly filled of these just very dark one-liner sentences. And they weren't in the places they were supposed to be, like this happened on the 12th or 11th. It was just kind of scribbled here and there and everywhere in this journal. But we can never know that for sure because the only detail from this case that would have been an eyewitness report from men that were stationed there at that time reporting on what's going on hour by hour is missing. It's gone. We'll never get that back. No one knows what happened to it. And I think that's why it got lost on purpose, because they wanted to erase the supernatural element from this case. I mean, you got to think, you're out in the middle of the ocean, off the coast of Scotland, which if you all did not know, is the birthplace of the legend of mermaids. It's the birthplace of so many different legends of fairy and fae and water spirits and all this different supernatural stuff. And this is one of the most secluded spots in the world that you could sleep at night. You're 20 miles away from an island, not even the mainland. You're an island off of what's technically an island, if you guys don't know how geography works there. And you're only there with 3 dudes. And you're talking about total dark. Besides your lighthouse that is on, everywhere you look, imagine looking out and all you can see in every direction is pure and total nothingness. That's it. The only sound you're hearing is the waves crashing and the wind howling. And this journal was supposedly filled with them freaking out the past week and talks of mutiny and turning on each other and everything else. It's very strange that that's the one thing that's missing. So let's get back to the real evidence that we supposedly have in the records. The supervisor of or the superintendent of the lighthouse committee, which was a thing back then, I guess it's still a thing now, came out to do an investigation. And what they found is on the west side of the island, there was destroyed structures. The railings were literally ripped from the ground. These are steel railings ripped from the ground. One of those big bolted down storage boxes was gone, like it had been ripped off the ground. They said that it would have had to have been an enormous storm, like a supernatural freak, like rogue waves, massive storms, just the top class of all hurricanes, essentially. It kind of makes me think of that show Widow's Bay, if you haven't watched it, about that supernatural freak curse storm that comes in. Because, you're talking about bent steel railings, bolts and rock ripped out. Just crazy. So the superintendent immediately was like, okay, I bet these 2 guys tried to go down and fasten it because there was ropes over there that those ropes should have been in a storage locker in the main lighthouse. So it looks like they were trying to bring ropes out there to maybe help secure and fasten things down. And this was right next to a big cliff. So the superintendent said, hey, I think that these 2 guys slipped in the water. The other guy saw it and he tried to go help, and then he also fell into the water. But we're back at square one. Who locked the door? Why did he, if it was an emergency, why did he lock the door behind himself? 2, the men's oil lamps were still in the lighthouse. They wouldn't, remember, it's pitch dark. It's total darkness. They would not have been able to see unless the storm was during the day. The only problem with that is that no other reports came through. There was a bunch of ships. We talked about the ship that went by earlier and saw the light was out. Tons of ships traveled through this alley during that time period, and no one reported any bad storms, any inclement weather. In fact, some of their sailors' actual reports said that the weather is extraordinarily stale, which means that it doesn't just mean it was boring. It means that there was like no wind. So it was hard for their ships that, operated on sails to sail where they needed to sail because there was almost no wind. So with no wind, you're not going to have these big monumental storms. And these sailors were going right by the lighthouse. They would have experienced this storm. There's no way that somebody would not have experienced this storm. It doesn't make any sense. That's the theory they went with. And a lot of people say that, yeah, we don't doubt the storm happened. We're also saying that storm was a supernatural element of some kind that just pounded this island, which is a neat tie-in because if you guys look at the missing 411 phenomenon, if you watch this channel a lot, you'll know that I love to talk about the missing 411. When these people go missing under strange, weird circumstances that no one can explain, and cadaver dogs just lose their scent just randomly after following their trail, the footprints just stop suddenly, you'll see that ranger stations will report freak anomaly storms that are extremely isolated. Like, when I say isolated, it means it affects a very small area. Look into that if you want to. I'll do a video about freak anomaly storms in the future. Many people believe that those are portal storms or some kind of supernatural element in some way, shape, or form. And in some Native American beliefs, even they think that is actually a storm from a thunderbird up in the clouds. We'll get into that one day if you guys want to. But the Missing 411 does a great job of breaking down these freak anomaly storms where radio goes out, compasses don't work. It's raining so hard you can't see 5 feet in front of your face. Like, they do a ton of stuff about that, and it is crazy and wild, and science still doesn't really know how to accurately depict when these storms will happen. Anyhow, getting back on track here, a lot of people believe that a storm is what happened. The Atlantic currents are very, very strong. It is not uncommon for a body to fall overboard or to fall in the water there, and the currents be so strong that it just pushes the body an ungodly distance away. And then, of course, ocean life is going to do what ocean life does and dispose of that body. So that is probably what happened if they did fall in the water. It's just one of those things. Do you think the storm did happen? Do you think it didn't happen? And if you do believe it happened, was it natural or unnatural? If you want to see a dramatized movie of what they think happened, you can watch a movie called The Vanishing. It stars Gerard Butler, and it is about them being on this island. I've watched the movie. It is pretty creepy, but it's also a really good depiction of what their final moments and days most likely looked like. And I think it's an amazing movie. Gerard Butler, I like him and everything. If you guys want to keep up with these stories or follow more interesting stories that I might have mentioned in this video that you haven't seen, go check us out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We're called Matt from Nomads, M-A-T-T from Nomads, N-O-M-A-D-S. And if you are listening on one of those platforms, come check us out on Facebook. It's a Nomads Animal Encounter. We also have a huge TikTok, but right now we're on a TikTok hiatus because for whatever reason, they don't like that I do conspiracy videos. They absolutely hate it. They've actually sent me messages about it that I have posted, and then they've deleted those videos. They hate that I do conspiracy videos. It is insane. We got 6 million views last week. And they don't want me doing them at all. They're actually threatening to ban the page right now on TikTok. So if you're on TikTok, if you're watching us on TikTok, follow one of those other platforms in case your boy disappears off of there, not in real life, hopefully.